Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Today we're going to be talking about ITOps and specifically Splunk's offering in this area, the premium app ITSI, that's Information Technology Service Intelligence. So I'm going to ramble for a minute or two just to let any other people coming in catch up, and then we'll get started. Now, just as a bit of an aside, a little bit about myself. My name is Paul Winchester. I've been working here at Somerford Associates for coming up to 5.5 years, focused on Splunk during that time, and mostly in the ITOps space, and particularly focusing on ITSI. So this is a topic somewhat dear to my heart. It's fair to say ITSI is quite a heavy and involved tool. It's certainly not something to go into lightly, but it is extremely powerful and certainly well worth the effort in getting set up and running. One other thing I'd say is that ITSI stands for Information Technology Service Intelligence. I'd like to see them drop the IT part of that, because actually a lot of the power of the product is looking beyond IT, but we'll get into that. So, as I say, welcome everyone this morning. Thank you for joining me. Hopefully I can give you some good insights into what ITSI is and what it can do for you and your business. So let me just check a few things and then we'll get started. All looks good, so let's crack on. So we have to show you this first slide here, the forward-looking statements. I don't think I'll be making any particularly, but because I'm going to be really running this as primarily a demonstration of the product and taking you through the different scenarios that it covers. So everything that's you'll be seeing today is there in the product, but in case I do make any forward-looking statements, please make your decisions based on the current available products. Right, let's get past that bit. So what is ITSI? Well, I've given you its full title, Information Technology Service Intelligence. And like I said, I'd like to focus on the service intelligence part of that. And it's worth mentioning what we mean by service in this context. So it's probably not following this strict ITIL definition of a service. When we talk about services in ITSI, we're generally looking at some sort of object, something that can be measured using KPIs, key performance indicators, some sort of metric giving you an indication of health, to give you an overall service health picture. So that's our first point there. We're very interested in ITSI to look at service health. And really the key to that is the concept that if you're monitoring something, although a given metric may be high or low or in some way abnormal, what's really important is the impact of that. So, very simple example, high CPU. Okay, your CPU is running hot. Does that matter? Is that important? What is the actual impact on service health? And although it may be an indicator of a process that's consuming a lot of resources, that may not actually be having a business impact. It isn't necessarily a problem. So when we talk about service health, we try and take all that into account to give a realistic representation of how a given service within the organization, whether that's an infrastructure service, whether that's an IT service, or whether it's a business service. You'll see later on that we show business metrics such as conversion rates, such as revenue, not just IT focused metrics. So service health, that's a key part of what we do. Event management. So KPIs are used to generate information. We call them notable events within the system. And those notable events are aggregated, brought together into episodes. Broadly speaking, very similar to an incident, but again, we're avoiding, in this case, the ITIL term because it isn't strictly an incident, because then it isn't an incident until we're actually going to do something about it. And it may be that this particular episode that we've created isn't something that requires immediate action. So the events that we generate, notable events, based on KPIs are aggregated, brought together into episodes that can then be worked on, whether that's creating a ticket in a ticketing system. It could be used itself as a ticket in a manner of speaking, and it can then be managed, resolved, analyzed as you'd expect from event management. So event management, another key component of what we do in ITSI. Infrastructure monitoring is one of the elements that underpins what we do as well. It's not essential, it's there. Just a brief history lesson, ITSI originally did not contain infrastructure monitoring, and certainly when I did my training 5 years ago, we were told very explicitly that ITSI should not be used as an infrastructure monitoring tool, although it sometimes was. That's very much not the case anymore. The previous product, Splunk App for Infrastructure, that was Splunk's infrastructure monitoring tool, was integrated into the core of ITSI some time ago. It's now fully integrated as part of the package. And infrastructure monitoring is a key element of what we can do with ITSI. As a quick aside, and slightly confusingly, Splunk also has an infrastructure monitoring tool as part of their observability suite. They seek to address slightly different problems, but they are complementary. And as I'll mention later, the observability data can be brought into ITSI for analysis as well. And I think the final key feature to mention in ITSI is that it provides a single pane of glass overview of your services, systems, processes, whatever it is that you're looking to manage. So let's move on. Now, I have shamelessly lifted this from Splunk's own documentations because I thought it was quite a useful diagram to show how this all comes together. And it also ties into what I was just talking about with Splunk observability as well. So at the at that middle there, where Splunk ITSI sits, we're collecting together logs, metrics, and traces in order to provide comprehensive information about your systems. Now, primarily in ITSI, we're going to be dealing with the first two, logs and metrics. We're going to be pulling data out of logs in order to produce KPIs that may be responding to numbers of error codes, or the types of codes that are in there, or particular messages, that sort of thing. And metrics such as numbers of transactions being processed, or disk space, or whatever it might be. The traces will be coming probably more indirectly from Splunk's APM tool, part of the observability suite. And through that and through all the other integrations that we can do with Splunk, we will get this complete picture, this overview that I mentioned before. So you can see underneath that, compute, network, storage, cloud, microservices, container service, and that list goes on and on. These are all the different sources that this information could come from. And essentially that is as comprehensive as you need it to be. Splunk's data onboarding processes are comprehensive. I would say there's virtually no data source that you can't bring into Splunk for analytic purposes. So the data onboarding processes, this sits on top of that. When we run an ITSI project, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do here at Somerford in terms of ITSI projects. When we run one of these projects, the kind of assumption is that the data onboarding side is more or less there. There may well be more data that needs to be brought in order to give that complete picture, but you're really looking at building ITSI in a mature Splunk environment, based on either Splunk Enterprise or Splunk Cloud, as it shows at the bottom. And what can we do with that? Well, across the top, really, these are kind of different set of points that, similar to what I was saying before. Real-time event correlation, so generating those notable events from KPIs that change state. State change of a KPI can then be used to create a notable event, and that notable event is correlated and brought together into episodes. Service health dashboards. I'm not actually going to look at dashboards themselves as part of this demonstration I'm going to do. Dashboarding is a key part of what Splunk does, but also dashboards can be more broadly considered to include things like glass tables, essentially any visualization, and also the service analyzer, which we'll see shortly. Then we get into the machine learning side of things, and sometimes referred to as AIOps. It's quite a trendy term. I suppose, you know, in some ways, the machine learning elements within ITSI are quite nicely concealed, I would say. They're there. They're actually a key and core part of the product. They form part of the process that generates episodes. Don't necessarily need to shout about it, but there are a couple of key ones that we'll look at: predictive analytics and thresholding, adaptive thresholding, that do use some tools that we can talk about as well. And then response and remediation integrations, really a key part of any of this sort of tooling. Most organizations rather will have tools they use for ticket processing, incident management, ServiceNow, BMC Remedy, etc. The integrations are there to bring the information from Splunk ITSI into those systems and back, so bi-directionally. And there's a lot more that can be done with that as well. Tools like Splunk On Call as well can be used. So what I want to do now is move on to the demo part of this. So let's take a look. So first off, we talked a bit about, what do we mean by services, the different layers. I want to talk about different personas within your organization that might use ITSI. We're looking here at the Service Analyzer screen. This gives an overview of services shown by the state they're in, the health they're in. At the moment, things are pretty good, pretty healthy. I should stress, of course, this is a demo environment. The data in it is cyclical. As you can see, we've got this set to the last 12 hours, and you can see quite a neat pattern of data, as you would expect from generated data for demo purposes. So some things will be in an actively good state or actively poor state at the moment. You can see there the list of top 50 services. That's going to show the top 50 in the order of which the percentage health they're in, lowest first. So you can see that most of ours are at 100%, which is pretty good. A couple just in the 90s, and then we've got two there, VMware related ones at 50%. Below that, we've got the KPIs shown in a similar way. But back to the different personas. I've got sort of three in mind for this demonstration. The first is your frontline analyst, the person who's looking to help identify problems, triage them, and then pass them on to senior analysts who will do the actual fixing that needs to be done. That's our second persona, that senior analyst. What are they going to do to troubleshoot the problem? And the final one is somebody whose job it is to have oversight over that, whether that's at an executive level, senior management within the service area, or help desk, or whatever it might be. So what does our frontline, our first line analyst need to see? Well, they need as much visibility as possible. So here we have all the services listed. This can be filtered as well and saved in a filter state, so that, for example, if you've got different units within your organization that need to look at this, then they can see a subset of whichever services are relevant to them. And what they're looking for is, well, anything that's not at its best. So although there is a lot of automation possible, it's always worth having an eyes-on view as well, so you can have that to look at. And if we are just investigating, for example, this on-prem database, it's not at 100%, so what's going on here? Well, you can see just by clicking on it, I should just click off just to prove this. Just by clicking on it, you can see that we've got a slight issue with disk space. It's not in a serious state, but it is something that perhaps needs attention. And this is where kind of general remediation can also be instigated to keep things like this, keep on top of things like this. Okay, so they're looking at it like this. Now, that's all very well and good. That gives you that good overview, but how do you see, what's important about services is how they're related to one another and how they impact one another. So if we click on this tree view, we get to see how these services are interlinked. Now, this is part of the build process. Okay, so you build your service and you would then say, this service depends on another service or is dependent on another service. So you can see that on-premise database that we were looking at sits at the bottom here. That leads into authorization and so on and so forth, right up to the front end. So this is a kind of e-commerce site. Anybody who's done anything with Splunk will know about Buttercup Games. So this is Buttercup Store. And we can also see there's an exclamation point on this service. And if we're just taking on the role of that frontline analyst, this would indicate to them that there's something, one of the entities, one of the servers most likely, that underpins this has an issue. And if we drill down, we can say, okay, where is that? And we can see that this particular database, MySQL2, is the potential, has this potential issue that perhaps needs investigating. So that's kind of one way that they might drill into a problem and say, okay, pass that on to someone, create a ticket in another system maybe, and say this needs looking at. All right, well, that's one approach. They might also have responsibility for keeping an eye on general infrastructure performance and things like disk space. So we have the infrastructure overview. Now I'm going to take a slight detour here just to explain something that sometimes there's some confusion about. As I mentioned at the start, ITSI is a premium product. It's something that you pay for on top of your Splunk license. There is also the option to use the IT Essentials app. That is a free tool, IT Essentials Work, I should say, with its complementary IT Essentials Learn tool. These are really good tools for starting out with ITE Learn. Get my words out. ITE Learn explains how to set up standard sorts of troubleshooting problems, and also how to manage some of the basics of data onboarding. And this is part of that. So when you use ITE Works, and look just like this, the difference is that when you go into your service analyzer, alerts and episodes, glass tables, and other things that we're going to see, those tools will not be available until you upgrade to ITSI. So just a quick detail there, and if you've got any questions about that, please let me know, because yeah, it's a topic that does come up quite a bit, and there is still some confusion about that. A transition took place a year to 18 months ago. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the infrastructure overview, and our entities, our servers, primarily grouped together according to their type. We can just show a general list. Obviously, if you've got thousands, and usually people have many thousands of entities in here, it's easier to look at it like this, like that rather. But for this, it's quite useful just to have a look at the list as it is. And from there, we can drill into something that we're interested in. At the moment, everything's active. As I say, this is test data, so everything's happy and active. But every now and then, you'll spot something that's showing itself to be inactive. And you've got event data, you've got analytics. This one is a bad example. Let's go back and see if we find a better one. So you can associate dashboards with these the different entity types, and I expect I'd pick one of the Linux ones. So let's go back to here. That's what I was using for testing earlier. And actually, let's go to that MySQL 02 one that we were looking at earlier. Perfect. Live demonstrations, gotta love them. Right. Let's move on from that. So the infrastructure overview provides another route for that frontline analyst to identify potential issues. They may also look at the alerts and episodes. I'm going to come back to that because that's how I want to kind of present it from our senior analyst. But yes, they may also be asked to triage. Well, let's start there. They may also be asked to triage these to essentially identify when an episode is something that needs actioning, or whether it's something that can be closed immediately. So what are we looking at here? So episodes are collections of notable events. Okay. And one of the ITSI kind of magic ingredients is the way it groups and clusters notable events together based on a series of rules that we set up and based on how those notable events are generated. So I'm going to give an example of a retail customer I work with, and they have certain standard operating procedures to deal with known problems. And then we also have a group of catch-all conditions to identify different scenarios that require remediation. We're really at an early stage there. That's primarily focused on infrastructure. We're then going to look at the other parts of the business, supply chain, for example, which we started on a few years ago, and then we focused on infrastructure monitoring. We're going to go back to their supply chain. But there we've created processes that identify the conditions that meet a particular standard operating procedure, SOP, and it will then create an episode based on that. That then has a series of steps built into it that are known processes for remediating that problem. But we also manage the unknown, if you like, the undefined problems as well. So at the top here, we have some metrics to tell you how fantastically well ITSI is helping you out. That's fine. That's all very nice. And then we have all our episodes. Now, you'll notice some of them are blue. Those are the ones that are there for information. Can be useful, but generally we're not going to be doing anything with those. It's not going to be actively, not going to be acting on those. They're there for analytic purposes. So let's just have a look at our critical and high level incidents. And you can see we don't have any criticals at the moment, which is nice. And first thing to note is the number of notable events within that are being sort of grouped together. And it's worth saying that the notable events will continue to be added to episodes until those that meet the conditions for that episode until that episode is closed. Idea being that you don't need to keep being alerted on the same problem over and over again. Those alerts will still be generated, those notable events, but the episode will collect them together into one. So you can see we've got over 100 notable events within this episode. They're coming from multiple different sources at different levels. We can have a look at a timeline to get an idea of what's happened and how we've got to this point. The disk seems to be our critical problem here, but others are beginning to come up as well. So you can see there's different levels of severity within this episode as well. The impact here is showing which services are impacted. We've got one more down here as well. So if you remember the service tree we looked at earlier, that's got, that's how this is, the impact of this is flowing upwards. Now, at the moment, this is showing the status at now, I should say. But at the time when this happened, these services would have been degraded. So that would have been shown here as well, and you see that in the topology tree as well. Similar episodes are very useful. Has this happened before? In the last 7 days? Yes, not surprisingly. Gives you a percentage of similarity as well. Maybe there's some actions that were taken that could help in this situation. Any comments that have been added? Again, if you're looking at similar episodes, that could be really useful. And then the overall activity, in this case, nothing specific has happened. You can have a look at the events that have been generated here, all linked up. This is really useful for actually seeing how we got here and what events are actually making up this episode. Instructions can be provided. You can see here we've got some Nagios instructions here. That's part of the setup of the aggregation policy. And then you can have a dashboard. Now, the other thing I want to highlight here before I forget, we've got the usual things you'd expect, the status, who it's assigned to, and what severity it is. But the actions menu here really is the key to how we work with this tool and how we integrate it with other tools. Now, this particular one is not currently set up to do an integration with an external ticketing system such as ServiceNow or VMC. If it was, excuse me, if it was, you'd see a link in this drop-down menu allowing you to create a ticket, and that ticket can also be created automatically. based on conditions that you can set. You can also use this with, it's not called ITOps anymore. It's not called ITOps anymore, is it? No, it isn't. I forget what it's called now. Sorry, Splunk on Call. You can link it to another ticketing system that you don't have an integration with. You can run a script if you know what the effect, what you need to run at this point. Email. Phantom is also Splunk Phantom, which is now also been renamed, is also another tool that we can integrate here. So in a very short webinar, it's hard to go into all that detail, and I will say at the end there's opportunities to go into this in more depth, but I really want to highlight the power of this with the potential to integrate with other systems, particularly systems that you're already using and are already well embedded. Okay, so our senior analyst, right? They're the one who's been assigned the problem. They come in here. Maybe the first line analyst has said, yeah, okay, Paul, he's the man for the job. We need to assign it to him, and the senior analyst can come in and see everything that's been assigned to them and start looking at it. And this really what we've been showing here is the different ways that they can start to deal with problems. They've got instructions. They can look at all the events and start doing analysis themselves. Another tool that analysts will find particularly useful is the deep dive. So let's see if I can drive this the way it's supposed to be driven. Let's say we've got a problem with our on-prem database. We click on that. Okay, we're going to jump to that in the service analyzer. Okay, here we are, the on-prem database. Okay, and you've got an option there to open all in deep dive. Okay, so let's have a look at the deep dive then. So the beauty of a deep dive is that everything's in the same time frame. Okay, so what you've got here are what are called swim lanes, which is catchy, and everything in the same time frame. Okay, so we're showing quite a lot there. Let's drop this down to the last few hours. If this would give me a chance to, yeah. Let's do the last 4 hours, just because I'm not completely confident in where this data is at the moment. Okay, so you can see the activity. You can see that everything's been absolutely fine for the last hour or so. We might be starting to see some problems again. But if we go back to where the incident was, here's the key issue, right? Database response time, that is very high. And you can see that it's ramping up. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to get rid of a few of these information lines. They're not really telling me anything. So let me just select a few of those and remove them. Yeah. Okay, that's looking a bit neater. Yeah, so we can now sort of start to see a timeline of here's the main issue that built up. What came before it? Well, disk space started becoming an issue before that. Memory use started becoming an issue before that. So perhaps there's some root cause there. And actually, if I go into the deep dives view, just to show this from a slightly different angle. Okay, so you can save those as well. So if you've got a particular service or collection of KPIs that are giving you problems, you can create a deep dive and save it so that if it comes up again, you can immediately go back to it. Now, here's one I prepared earlier. The key thing I wanted to show here is we've also got no change requests of Windows events in parallel. Okay, so we've not just got metric data, we're getting ServiceNow data coming in here as well, just for demonstration purposes. But the reason why this is here is if there was a change request that happened to land just beforehand, and actually here's our change request coming in, and perhaps we're starting to see an impact here as a result of that change request. Perhaps that's the reason why we've got a problem. A change has been made because, after all, we all know, anybody who's been around IT any length of time knows that if something suddenly goes wrong, something must have changed. Okay, so maybe that change was made in error, and that's why we've got an issue. So that's a kind of deep dive approach that an analyst may take to do that kind of root cause analysis. Yeah, so that's two personas. We've got our frontline analyst, our senior analyst. The third person who might be looking at it is somebody who needs some sort of oversight, some sort of overview. And we talk about the end-to-end view and a glass table view. Well, we literally have glass tables in here. Let's take retail, because I was talking about retail earlier, as an example. The great thing about this tool is you can make this look pretty much any way you like. But as you'll see, as it's loading, there are a lot of metrics being presented on here. More than I would usually put on a glass table, to be honest. That's a bit more information than I'd want on a screen myself. But what this is showing actually is quite useful. The different layers, okay? You've got overall business performance, your kind of headline figures here. Then you've got your service level agreement performance. Okay, are we hitting those SLAs? Are we meeting those, whether those are internal SLAs or SLAs you have with your customers or whatever it might be? And then you've got your overall your infrastructure status and your cloud status, all showing in here as well. So a very useful overview just to have oversight of everything that's going on. Let's say end-to-end processes being represented here, and like I say, this can be set up in a myriad of different ways. So you could represent a whole end-to-end process. Let's talk about supply chain, right? Okay, I'm going to do some work on supply chain soon. You want to show in this sort of glass table each step of the supply chain, because they're so dependent on each other. One glitch, one problem at one step in that supply chain is going to have a knock-on effect. You want to see what the impact of that knock-on effect is going to be, and you could show that in a glass table, showing that sort of flow. You can sort of see a bit of that sort of flow here with the going from the web store back through load balancer, product catalogs, databases, API gateways, etc. So flowing from the front end to the back end. That can be a really useful tool, and some people have these up on big screens, just to kind of show so everyone can see where you are. But yeah, a really powerful tool for that type of high-level summary information. Okay, now there are a couple of other details I just wanted to show. So let me close a couple of tabs. Since I want to make sure this is a reasonably technical demonstration, but I don't want to go too deep into it. Like I said, there are other forums, other ways we can go into more depth with this. I want to show a couple of those AI, those machine learning characteristics that we were talking about. So when we set up a service, it's also worth seeing how this is sort of set up, how does this actually fit together. So when we set up a service, let us pick that on-prem database, which I know is the top of the second page. There it is. Now, sorry, let me go back a second. I want to highlight something here as well. Page 2 again. You'll notice here that we've got some templates. Okay, so service templates are a really important part of what we do to make ITSI more efficient. You are likely to have a number of services that follow a similar pattern, a similar template. What you can do is use a service template to give you those starter KPIs. You can expand on them, you can mix and match, but you can at least have that as a starting point. Those are also synchronized. So if you've got, let's say, Linux servers, and you want to have 6 key KPIs on all of your Linux services, but you may need to change the thresholds on them. When you change that threshold, you can push that change out to all of the linked services or the linked KPIs on those services to reflect that. So it's a really useful way of maintaining this, because it can get huge. There are customers with thousands of services, and you need to make sure that it's as easily maintainable as possible. Okay, so here we have our on-premise database. We've got some fairly standard KPIs on here: error counts, utilization, input, output, etc., throughput. And one thing to mention here is predictive analytics. Now, this is a fairly heavy-duty tool that we can use within ITSI. The important thing here, or the way that we use it, is if you've got a particular service that maybe is one of your more crucial ones, and you want to see how a series of issues that can be identified from the KPIs might start to impact the service. What you can do is you can use the predictive analytics to look for patterns in your data. Okay, you train it usually over a week's worth of data. Actually, you've got 14 days worth of data here that we use. So this is looking at services that are well established, that you've been running for a long time, that you're confident in the KPI's accuracy, you're confident in the data's consistency. Once you've got all those things in place, you can start to say, okay, we can now use this predictive analytics tool to identify patterns in the data so that when certain things start to move in a particular direction, then we can predict with a decent level of accuracy that in the next half hour, 1 hour, maybe a couple of hours, that we may get to this state. Yeah. The key here is that we're trying to predict and then prevent outages or impacts on the services using this sort of tooling. I won't do the demonstration here, it takes a bit of time, but again, this is something we can go into in more depth. The other thing to show here as well, not sure which the best example is going to be, so I'm just going to jump in. But we've also got the option to use adaptive thresholding. I'm not going to demonstrate it now, but just to explain how it works. Where you've got systems that can fluctuate at different times of day, sorry, two different parts to this. There's adaptive thresholding, there's also thresholding modeling. Where you've got KPIs that could behave differently at different times of day, but it's not necessarily anomalous, you're looking for looking at building a model that understands that, for example, first thing in the morning, you might get a spike of activity. Over the weekend, it'll be quieter, that sort of thing. So you can build the alerting, the thresholding to adapt, to change through the day to follow the patterns that are known within the data. And if you bear with me a second, actually, should be able to find an example. And the reason why we look at this is just it has a pattern. Obviously, this is generated data, so yeah, so it's building up it. You can see this pattern, and I'm not going to do it now because it does take a couple of minutes. But essentially, what will happen is that all these thresholds will match this pattern of data, so that only deviations from this pattern will be alerted on. Rather than just setting static thresholds that would probably trigger every day at these extremes. Okay, I'm not going to get, I should try not to get too distracted by that, but it's a really cool feature. Okay, so I think that will probably do in terms of demo, but hopefully that's given you a flavor of what you can achieve with ITSI. Let's get back to the slideshow. Not too much more to cover, just really summarizing from here. So what are the benefits? Yeah, what do you get and how does it work? So end-to-end service level visibility, whether that's talking about things like glass tables, but really KPIs linked to services and services linked to one another, showing how they interact with each other. One thing I didn't show there is how you can weight service health according to different KPI statuses, how you can weight services themselves that have dependencies. Maybe the database is more critical than the load balancer, so you weight it accordingly. So all of that and that tree view of the services, showing how they interact and how they're interlinked, is a key part of that as well. Efficient incident response. We looked at things like the episodes, bringing together that the notable events, the alerting. Really important to concentrate on the actual incident itself rather than the alerts. And the way that episodes aggregate all those alerts together, those notable events, and continue to do so whilst the incident's being worked on, so you're not getting bombarded with alerts, is a really key part to making that process efficient. Then providing those analytic tools, the deep dive, the infrastructure overview, to really get to root cause as quickly as possible. Then there's more as well. I didn't show, I can't show everything, but you can build dashboards. If you're familiar with Splunk, you'll know what Splunk can do. So yeah, there's a lot there to provide effective incident response. The high-level overview, that sort of glass table, can really represent any process within your business. You've got the metrics, that whether those are services or KPIs. And another thing you can do on there, we looked at predictive analytics. You can put those predictive scores onto that as well, so you can actually show the status as it potentially will be in half an hour or an hour, not much more than that, but you can put that on there as well. So there's a lot that you can do there. Automation, those machine learning components. You can also do things like create tickets in, for example, ServiceNow or BMC Remedy automatically based on certain conditions, so you don't swamp that system as well, but you can set up that sort of level of automation. You can even automate scripts to run off the back of these sorts of alerts. I would always advise a high degree of caution with that, but it can be done. So yeah, lots of ways to streamline the processes, make them more efficient. And integrated solutions. So that's where you can tie in multiple different tools. We've talked about ticketing tools. Splunk On Call is an alert management tool to make sure that you're getting the right teams and the right individuals, getting the messages they need in order to be able to remediate problems. Phantom, which is now Splunk SOAR, which can produce and use playbooks to run through solutions to these sorts of problems, and far more as well. So it is a complex tool. It does require a fair amount of investment in terms of people and time to make it work. But once it's built and once it's running, it can really make a huge difference. So it's very important, though, that process is managed correctly. And so if you want to talk more about how Somerford approach ITSI projects and work, I'd be very happy to spend some time on that. If anything occurs after this, or anybody listening to a recording of this wants to get in touch, say my name's Paul Winchester, and I'll be very happy to help with any inquiries. I work at Somerford. I work both in sort of pre-sales as well as delivery, so I've got kind of full visibility over the whole process. So any questions at all, please let me know. Okay, well, if there are no questions, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate joining me today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time.